So you don't agree then? I mean, when people say, oh, it's okay for him, he's escaped.
What have I escaped? Where, anyway, would I go to escape? To your country? Would I get a political asylum here? Where would a fleeing black man go if he wanted to escape?
Welcome to Archival. I'm your host, Juanita Tolliver, and today we continue our journey through the archives that are all about rest and relaxation. Sometimes rest requires a change of scenery. I mean, we all do it every time we take a vacation. It's our small act of leaving our world and our problems behind, even if only for a little while. For James Baldwin, France became his escape in 1948. Please note that there is one mention of suicide early in this episode. In 1948, James Baldwin fled the United States in search of a refuge from Jim Crow laws and the laws prohibiting same-sex relationships. At that point in his life, he was a 24-year-old fledgling writer who was tormented by racism and homophobia. During a 1984 interview featured in the Paris Review, Baldwin said he left the States because, quote, "My luck was running out. I was going to jail. I was going to kill somebody or be killed. My best friend had committed suicide 2 years earlier, jumping off the George Washington Bridge." Baldwin's pain is palpable. He was suffocating and searching for an escape hatch from his reality in Harlem, New York, and he found it in Paris, France. Baldwin's sojourn mirrored many other Black artists, writers, and performers who also absconded to France and Europe with their talents. Naturally, he connected with many of them throughout his time in France. I'm talking about the greats like Josephine Baker, Buford Delaney, Maya Angelou, Howard Swanson, Nina Simone, Miles Davis, Ernest Charles Nemo, and of course, his mentor, at least before their infamous falling out, Richard Wright. Paris, France was James Baldwin's escape, but it is clear in his writing and interviews that he did not romanticize the city. In Take Me to the Water, an essay featured in his book No Name in the Streets, Baldwin wrote, quote, "I had never, thank God, and certainly not once I found myself living there, been even remotely romantic about Paris. My journey, or my flight, had not been to Paris, but simply away from America. I ended up in Paris almost literally by closing my eyes and putting my finger on a map." Baldwin's expressed ambivalence about choosing to move from New York to Paris conveys a complicated relationship with the city and his experiences and relationships there, as well as his desperation to simply get out of the United States. But there's something in Baldwin's tone in his 1972 essay and his aforementioned 1984 interview that contrasts with the aspirational tone he used as a 22-year-old when he wrote to his then mentor, renowned author Richard Wright, in 1946 about his desire to visit France. In Talking at the Gates, author James Campbell paraphrased Baldwin's letter to Wright, stating, quote, "On hearing the news of Wright's sponsored trip to France during the second half of 1946, Baldwin gaily declared, 'It's a very wonderful thing to have happened. The only other person he would have liked it to happen to,' he jokes, 'is himself. He has dreamed of visiting France since he was 12, he says." Based on Baldwin's own words, It's hard to believe that choosing to move to France was a dispassionate choice, but the move most certainly was one driven by a desire to survive and to write. During his first 7 years in Paris, Baldwin wrote and published Go Tell It on the Mountain, Giovanni's Room, and Notes of a Native Son. The works are unencumbered, beautiful explorations of identity, blackness, and queerness, but they are all still representative of labor and work, not rest. In this era of his life, Paris, France was effectively a remote work location without the weight of systematic racism, oppression, and homophobia. So, where exactly did James Baldwin go to rest? One example of James Baldwin resting came during the summer of 1950 with his partner, Swiss painter Lucien Happersberger. In the biography, Baldwin, a Love Story, author Nicholas Boggs wrote about how Baldwin began experiencing recurring nightmares about his mother being sick and his inability to pay for a trip home because he hadn't finished his first novel. That feeling of compounded shame led to a bout of depression and sickness. In the midst of Baldwin's depression, Happersberger invited him to visit the Swiss Alps for 2 weeks to stay at his family's chalet and to rest. Their summer trip included the normalcy of domestic life as Happersberger cooked for Baldwin, and Baldwin read to Happersberger. They hiked the same mountains that Mark Twain traversed. They also visited the town's thermal springs that apparently had healing powers. This was rest. It was rejuvenation. And it was how James Baldwin recentered himself. After their first 2-week trip, Baldwin returned to the chalet with Happersberger 2 more times over the next 2 years, and he finished his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Baldwin also wrote about his experience as the first Black person who'd likely ever enter the town where he and Happersberger were staying for Harper's Bazaar in 1953. Another location where James Baldwin practiced rest was in Istanbul, Turkey. Baldwin made his first trip to Istanbul in 1961, and it was a long-delayed response to an invitation extended by a friend in 1958. Baldwin's assistant and biographer, David Leeming, shared, quote, "There was too much expectation of him in the U.S., and even in his second home, Paris, where he was also well known by the early 60s. He was isolated and could lead a normal routine in Istanbul without understanding Turkish or being stopped on the streets." Baldwin enjoyed recurring stays in Istanbul between 1961 and 1971, and Sadat Pakay, a young student and photographer, captured Baldwin's time resting there through the years on film and in photographs. In one image, Baldwin is seated in front of a window at his typewriter as he takes a long drag on his cigarette with his eyes cast downward. In another photo, Baldwin leans on a railing as he converses with 2 U.S. Navy sailors in their white uniforms, as a third sailor raises a camera to take a photo, and the blue mosque towers over all of them. Pakay also filmed a short documentary of Baldwin called From Another Place, in which he captured Baldwin's daily calm and routine. In one clip, Baldwin is seen shifting under his covers in bed and scratching his head before he eventually decides it's finally time to get up. Baldwin then slides into his slippers, walks to the window in his underwear, and slings the curtains open. Take a listen to Baldwin's words in that clip.
I suppose that many people do blame me for being out of the States as often as I am. But one can't afford to worry about that because one does, you do what you have to do the way you have to do it. And Perhaps only someone who is outside of the States realizes that it's impossible to get out. The American power follows one everywhere.
If you'd like to see the images and videos referenced in this episode, you can watch Archival on YouTube at Archival Pod. Paris aside, there is one place in France where James Baldwin did find rest. St. Paul du Vence, an idyllic town nestled between the rolling hills in the south of France. But that rest only came after repeated traumas and assassinations of civil rights leaders. Baldwin described his experiences as an author and witness to the civil rights movement in the 1970 documentary Meeting the Man.
I must point out, though, too, that I've been working in the last few years between assassinations. That doesn't make it any easier either. I mean, they're killing my friends. It's as simple as that. And have been all the years that I've been alive. For no reasons which have any validity.
Some of the friends that Baldwin alluded to in that clip are Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. In August 1987, Baldwin wrote about his tortured journey to St. Paul du Vence for Architectural Digest. He wrote that King's assassination in 1968, quote, devastated my universe and was ultimately to lead me to this house. I wandered around after Martin's death. For some reason, I don't know why, I seem to have avoided France. I collapsed physically several times, and when I came back to Paris, I collapsed again. Friends then shipped me, almost literally, out of the American hospital to St. Paul du Vence. The images accompanying his essay show that Baldwin's house was a stone farmhouse with 12 rooms that featured wood-beam ceilings and fireplaces. Outside is a garden of wild roses, large palms, and bushes that grow untamed and drape themselves onto the window frames of the house. Next to the house is a large bamboo table covered by a wooden awning where vines extend across the top, creating additional shade. Baldwin referred to the terrace outside of his office as an island of silence and peace. That's what this old farmhouse gave him, and this is where James Baldwin lived and found rest from 1968 until his death in December 1987. If you'd like to see the images and videos referenced in this episode, you can watch Archival on YouTube at Archival Pod. Before we close out this episode, I want to share some of the research that got left on the cutting room floor. You know, the random findings and records in the archives that I explored, but were tangentially related to the show theme. Still, they were beyond exciting to learn about. I'm going to call this new segment One Last Nugget. Here we go. Did you know that James Baldwin wrote the screenplay for Malcolm X, the 1992 Spike Lee joint? I screamed when I came across an archives entry at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture that noted that after Marvin Worth purchased the film rights to Malcolm X autobiography, he hired James Baldwin to write the screenplay. Now, Columbia Pictures did not like the manuscript, and they brought in Arnold Pearl to finish it and make revisions, after which James Baldwin left the project. But when Spike Lee made the film with Warner Brothers, he adapted the script that was written by James Baldwin and Arnold Pearl. So naturally, after I finished screaming about finding out this detail, I went to watch the opening credits of Malcolm X to see James Baldwin's name. But it wasn't there, y'all. It was not there. Spike Lee was listed, Arnold Pearl was listed, but they were the only two writers that appeared. So I started digging some more. I mean, this is how research goes for me every single time, y'all. It's like a bottomless pit. Next, I found a short story in the Chicago Tribune from December 1992, in which Spike Lee said that James Baldwin's estate petitioned the Writers Guild to have his writing credit removed from the film because every word was not his. That only left me with more questions, y'all. Like, what was said during Spike Lee's conversation with James Baldwin's estate, i.e., James Baldwin's sister, who is the executor of his estate? Did James Baldwin's sister have instructions from him to specifically not allow his name to be used, especially given how he left the project all those years ago? Honestly, this is how new projects spring up for me, because now all I want to do is make a documentary about how Malcolm X was made, and I might actually do it. Thank you for listening to Archival. The most thrilling part about probing the archives for information about James Baldwin's time abroad and seeking rest has been feeling shock about the findings, because this information disrupts everything that I thought I knew. I thought Paris was a place of rest, when it was in fact a satellite work site. But I am grateful to know that James Baldwin truly found rest in Switzerland, Turkey, and the south of France. I hope you enjoyed exploring the complex reality of James Baldwin's attempts to rest with me. And if you did, please rate and subscribe to Archival wherever you get your podcasts. Archival is a production of J. Tolliver Media, LLC.